Start broadcasting. Hello, welcome. Digital Roundtable, April 7th. We are excited. It's a great looking day in Austin, Texas. Fabulous temperature. This is why you live in the South. Awesome winters. And we have a great guest speaker today. Circle back in a moment with him. Let me say hello to Llewelyn King. Llewelyn, how are you, sir?
Very well, thank you, Andres. Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you for being with us today once again. We always looking forward to your incredible insights. And we are missing John Butler, who is running late, and he may pop up at some point in the program. So we will, warn you on that, and don't be shocked when he shows up with guitar and everything, I'm sure. Noel, how are you, sir?
Doing super, Andres. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the show.
Oh my goodness, it's so great here. And I tell people that I've been meeting lately that if you look at the parallel weather-wise, where San Diego and sort of the French Riviera, I know some of these places are. Brownsville happens to be in that little same latitude, and it has phenomenal weather.
Send them over. Send them over.
We're trying. See, here you go. Let's see how we fare today. So let me start by introducing Noel formally. Again, Noel Bernal is the city manager of Brownsville, Texas, which is a fabulous community just south of San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, west of Houston. It is just across the bay from South Padre Island, if anybody listening have ever been. Noel, hopefully today, will share his vision of the city of the future, his views on economic development, digital transformations. He has a lot to share on the space race, because SpaceX is a neighbor and in many ways tax-paying customers, and much more. City of Brownsville, again, a great place. Prior to Brownsville, Noel was the deputy city manager at city of Coppell, Texas, which is just north of Dallas. He was assistant city manager of Taylor, Texas, which is headquarters of ERCOT is. And he has had a long public service city management experience. He has a BS, degrees in sociology, political science, local government management, and public financial management from the University of Texas Pan American. And he has a postgraduate certificate from the University of Virginia in executive leadership and management. Welcome, Noel, again.
Thank you, Andres.
And yeah, absolutely. As you all know, we tend to review the news and what's happening, and we'd love to get your insights, Noel, from your point of view as a city manager and what's happening in South Texas. So COVID continues to be happening. It's still here, it hasn't gone anywhere, but it seems like there's a bit of a hope and under control. Vaccinations are up to 106 million. That's basically, we're at our run rate of 20 million vaccinations per week. And as I understand it, anybody 16-year-olds or anybody that is 16 years or older is allowed to get vaccinated in most states and in most systems. So, in theory, as the experts say, to be vaccinated by the end of June, if they want to be vaccinated, of course. However, we will get a sense from you all on the quick, and really curious about from you, Noel, being a international destination from your airport in a border state with Mexico. What is happening with COVID, and from the point of view of has COVID helped you do things differently or better? Anything good beyond the fact that there's a tragedy behind it and some families have lost their loved ones? Is there anything that is COVID helping us to become better, to be more resilient? What's your take?
Yeah, that's a great way to start the discussion. COVID is very fresh and in the minds of a lot of folks. I think for us, there's the organizational application, and then there's a community side. From a community perspective, I'll just mention that we're actually faring very well at the moment. Our positivity rate is hovering around 5%, which is very, very good. The governor broke up the state in about 10 regions, and so each region there were some indicators that he set out versus taking a one size fits all approach. That based on what they were experiencing, there would be locked down, so to speak, where they would have additional measures applied. That 15% positivity rate is the magic number. We have lately, the past month, more or less, we've been able to stay under that. We did have a temporary period where we went above it, and we have our own local threat matrix that we use to communicate to the community from a level 1 to a level 5. So we were hanging around the level 5 and 4 levels for a while. But what we have done, what the Mayor and Commission have done, is provided a lot of leadership. And on the front end, we were very, very strict and very aggressive with the measures. On the back end, we're being more conservative. And because of that, we know what our community challenges are. We know what some of our systemic issues are, whether it's the amount of individuals that are uninsured. We undertook a study during COVID through a grant made available to us from the New American Economy. And we studied, for example, the immigrant population. We studied you asked about the immigrant, right, the border. So we wanted to understand it better. We know what the impact is to our economy and things like that. But we wanted to understand from a COVID perspective, how do we ensure that our policies are equitable, that we're able to take on programs and strategies that help us not have any additional exposure because of our unique location. And what that informed us is, one, the commission was doing the right thing with being aggressive, but it also helped us make decisions about how to leverage the CARES funding that we received last year around April, which was just over $10 million. So we were the first and only city in the Rio Grande Valley to have a city-led drive-through for COVID testing. And through that, we made it available at no cost to all the uninsured. But we had data, we had information. It wasn't just we want to be the first. I mean, there's no benefit of being the first and only. It's what is the outcome that we're seeking, and the outcome that we sought is informing policy decisions. Right? We have a public health department in the city, so we're not wholly reliant on the county. So we can do things differently. We can have access to data. We partner with our School of Public Health. So we had about 50% of those tested uninsured. So we approached around $750,000 of testing. And I think we've mitigated any adverse effects, that were, let's say, beyond our control, because we've done things through the avenues that we do have available through our governing and legislative authorities to implement the proper programs. Our police department, our public health department, we've regulated and worked with our businesses as these measures were coming down from the state as well. So I think we've kept a kind of a full court press on at all times, but it's been our ability to adapt and be agile and responsive to the community needs. Before we could really do that, I would say that we had to take care of the organizational needs first. So we had this framework. We told the commission that let's take care of the organizational needs. Once we put on our oxygen mask, community needs, and then the business support needs. Internally, what we had done is around February of 2020, when we first saw the first indications of COVID, we engaged with a group called Everbridge on continuity planning using pandemic planning frameworks. So our emergency management plans were rendered useless pretty much, immediately. So we instead took a continuity planning approach based on pandemic planning, which this firm did pro bono. And that was a major benefit to us because we understood out of the gate that we needed to exercise the mental, physical, emotional discipline to endure a 12 to 18 month affair with COVID. That we had to have, strategies like telework implemented. We needed to look at 3-level deep redundancy within our staffing. We needed to really look at a host of things, prepare for 3 waves potentially. So a lot of these things we knew because of that homework we did early on in that preparation. And I think that by doing that within the organization, it then allowed us to make decisions. We were kind of taking care of ourselves, but then it allowed us to take care of the community. Right now, what we're doing is we were designated as a vaccine provider, which is not easy to do because the state would rather have a better span of control and work through counties. There's only 254 counties. It's more manageable for the State Office of Emergency Management to just work with county judges and their teams. Well, in our case, because we had an infrastructure in place for COVID-19 testing, we were able to make an argument to the Department of State Health Services that we could be a vaccine provider to accelerate the vaccinations of Brownsville citizens. Availability of vaccines is still an issue. That's not unlike any other area that's facing that. You just talked about what the president has committed to on the rollout, but we're prepared. We're prepared to quickly get them in the hands of the right people. And then in addition to that, because of other innovative programs that we had in place, we're actually using our fire department to go directly to the home for the elderly. So that's another one of those first and onlys that our fire department is EMS certified, and we're actually going to the homes of those 60 and older that are bedridden and taking the vaccine to them.
Wow, that's fantastic. Llewelyn, anything?
Yes, indeed. Noel, if you could tell us a little bit about Brownsville so we can put what you say into a perspective. How big is it? What are its problems? What are its virtues? And why should we all move there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think if you move here, we understand that we need to add value. What is the value proposition? So just for some context, Brownsville has this tagline that it used to use back in the day. It's been a while, but ironically, there's now a festival that was put together for the first time in 2019 that bears that name. And it used to be known as the Crossroads of the Hemisphere. And historically, Brownsville was significant because it has ties to the Civil War. It was a port. Fort Brown was here. It was a means of logistical use for weaponry and supplies and goods, and even the more clandestine activity. But it all happened in Brownsville, and that crossroads continues today. I think Brownsville is in a very interesting kind of juxtaposition because quality of life, climate, geography, beauty, it's all there. Just the way that Andres was describing, I describe Brownsville as it's like a beautiful lady that doesn't need makeup, right? I think Brownsville, when you come and see it, it's effortlessly beautiful. We don't need makeup to look nice and be attractive to folks. We have beautiful resacas, which are like these oxbow lakes that break out of the Rio Grande River. It makes us unique. They have their own story where they at one point were kind of lost on the local community, but then recently they've been, seen as an asset and they're being leveraged as such. But more than that, there's some potential with assets that we possess. We are a multimodal community. We possess a regional airport, which are still for the future, the economic drivers for regions. We have the largest land port at 40,000 acres here, one of the largest land ports in the country that has remained untapped. We have connections to Mexico, which makes us a binational economy, a binational culture. We have the frontier of new space. And that's a whole nother dimension that Brownsville now is seeking to capitalize. I think over the years, Brownsville has sought to capitalize on these assets and this kind of multimodal mix that we possess. But now it needs to be done in concert with the future and what additional opportunities are now being open to us. And what we don't want to be is late to the party. New space is at the infancy of that potential $1 trillion industry between now and 2040. And we don't want to be delayed in making the strategic investments and decisions so that the quality of life and the new wealth opportunities that can afford us are not tapped into. Lastly, I would say we have some of the best tacos and most friendly people that you can find.
Well, that all sounds marvelous. Can you tell me what is your population?
Population is approaching 200,000.
And what are your problems? What would you like to fix? What is your headache? What keeps you awake? Oh,
Well, what keeps me up at night at home are my 3 and 1 year old, to be more literal, but you know, we have our fair share of challenges, right? Brownsville, unlike any other community, has its challenges. But I think the challenges that I would speak to, and what part of what made Brownsville appealing, I just mentioned, it has natural characteristics geographically, location-wise, that make it a nice place to want to be at. It has potential. It has assets that can be maximized, and that's all fine. It's what you do with that. Okay, right? We all know that you have to, potential is unrealized, and you have to then execute and deliver on those opportunities. And I think our challenges here probably stem more from a leadership standpoint. When I was recruited to Brownsville, what struck me was that there was a need to rally around a unified vision. Not that there hadn't been attempts to put together visions. I mean, there was a comprehensive plan. There was what's called Imagine Brownsville. There were other efforts. There was a United Brownsville effort, but that kind of went sideways. I think what had happened over time is that the city's role of being the ultimate enabler and facilitator of leadership with its stakeholder entities, that role had been abdicated to a certain degree. So there was a sense that there needed to be a connecting vision that really aligned the different entities, community, governing body, staff together to move the community forward. Because what I just mentioned is it's what we are, it's what lies before us, but all that could be for naught if we don't capitalize. So we had more of these qualitative, intangible challenges, right? So how do you cast that vision? How do you create that influence now from the city standpoint so that you have a platform where you can start to work in collaboration with your community partners, with academia, with your nonprofits, with the private sector, et cetera, to begin to move the community forward, right? What's that story? So we have challenges. I don't think the issue was the challenges. It was more the leadership issues of how do you tackle the digital divide? How do you tackle the economically distressed community that we are? How do you capitalize on the innovative opportunities that SpaceX has? All those things are great, but if you can't sit in a room and as a governing body and staff and community partners sit down and strategically plan for the long term and then be consistent and disciplined in the execution, it's all for naught, because all that's going to be left at the end of the day is, well, we have all this potential, right? So I would say the biggest issue here were probably leadership issues, which is why my focus when I got here was all about culture, all about developing a culture of leadership at all levels, focusing on the people side, so that if we have a healthy organization, an organization that's learning, an organization that's examining and scanning external trends and environments, that understands how to tackle the wicked problems that we have through innovation, then those problems really become less insurmountable and more realistic for us to actually address.
Yeah. Let me dovetail.
I can rattle off the problem.
Yeah, let me dovetail in that, Noel, and basically drive us into, the markets are highly optimistic that things are going to get better. Things are popping up in the financial industry. The interest rates are slightly moving up because of maybe some potential inflation, because maybe there's too much money being thrown in the recovery. But we got the 1.9 trillion, we got a 2.25 trillion package that is coming. And there are four things that we talk a lot about in this show that drive this digital transformation. And we're curious and want to understand from your mouth sort of how you see things and how important these things are, and where do you want to be perhaps. So telecommunications is a big one. And in the current 2 trillion plan that needs to be approved by Congress, there is a big chunk of it just for what the administration calls the Universal Broadband Access, $100 billion. There is all kinds of stuff going on already today. The SEC has a 3.2 billion emergency subsidy program for operators, fixed and mobile, you know, the AT&Ts of the world, Verizon, what have you, that they're tapping into. And there was a poll that was done across the United States where Americans, 71% of Americans say that they would want Google, Facebook, and Amazon to provide broadband capabilities if there are no other choice. So tell us, from your point of view, sitting there in Brownsville, managing a significant budget, 200,000 inhabitants, a large traveling crowd that comes every year. How important is broadband? Where do you see that playing a big role in the future for Brownsville?
Yeah, broadband is foundational for us, just really fundamentally from a survival standpoint. I think what we want to get to is a point where we're actually talking about broadband from a competitive advantage, because in the 21st century context, we understand that technology isn't necessarily the panacea for us, but it's a huge opportunity. It represents a huge opportunity for us to address some of our challenges via technology. It's not going to be, again, it's not meant to be the be all. I think for us, what we engaged in, and there's this model, we use what's called the value disciplines model. You may be familiar with that. There was that book in the early 90s by Tracy Warzima and Mike, I forget his last name offhand, but the book is called, what is it? The Discipline of Market Leaders.
Yep.
It was a great book. It was a seminal book that help organizations. And that's just one of 5 major frameworks that are used to set strategy, right? We did the 21st century version of that book last year called Digital Disciplines. And what we did is it's an update. And what we wanted to understand, Andres, is that, okay, we have the Internet of Things, we have social, we have mobile, we have cloud, we have big data. What does that mean for Brownsville if we can align that with our organizational strategy and business model, so to speak? If that's the case, it's going to be the tail wagging the dog situation, where we're just kind of pursuing, widgets and technology applications, but without there being a true business model, so to speak, of what it needs to do for Brownsville to move forward. And when you begin to look at that from that lens, even before this digital disciplines book study that we went through, as we determine what the organizational strategy should be, which we selected as product solution leadership, which basically means that, as a city, we can pursue to be operationally excellent. Think of your Lean Six Sigma kind of manufacturing, ISO 9000. Well, for us, we're already lean as we were resource constrained, and we're so lean that we're going to cut to the bone. That strategy didn't really fit us. We can become the Chick-fil-A Southwest, and while we do provide a service to the community, even if we serve our community, we couldn't fulfill their every desire.
Right.
The other one is the product leadership or solution leadership. We're pretty much innovating our way out of things. And that's where technology plays a role for us, because one of the things we share and discuss here internally is that our margin of error is a lot less than that of many other organizations that have more resources. So when we look at technology investments and when we look at our strategy, we have to be that much more hyper-focused. And because of that, when you look at broadband, if you work backward from the strategy work, without broadband, you really can't play in the smart city space. That's your ticket to play. So I came from a community, just for context, where it was a wealthy community, no broadband issues. They had first world problems. This is an affluent pocket in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We had, I think it's probably the state's first, they had their own smart city board. So think of a Parks and Recreation board. They had a smart city board. That was part of the 2040 plan that was designed for a smart future. They could be playing with a smart city board because they had the ability, they had the resources, and they had the broadband coverage and so many other smart city applications already in progress. We had to come back to the basics. And for us, it's like building a house. You can't build it without your foundation. And broadband for us, it's also critical because from there, then we kind of open things up from a big picture standpoint about, okay, now how do we begin to build and address the other systemic issues that we're facing in Brownsville because we've made the first most critical investment, which is broadband.
Got it.
And let me ask
Llewelyn,
you,
follow up?
yes, please. I'd like to ask you, how large is your broadband deficit?
50%.
So you've got a long way to go. How are you addressing? I mean, how do you spread broadband? Is it an infrastructure problem, or is it a capital problem of people not being able to afford it themselves? It would seem to me there are two parts to the broadband deficit. Partly it's not available because it hasn't been installed, and partly people can't afford to use it because it's very expensive to get it from your local cable company. How do you address those two issues?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I think the former is more the driver. It's a market failure that we face down here, where there's a concept out there called digital redlining. We've been redlined because our demographics don't line up with internet service providers' short-term plans for going in there and being able to make $1. So they're going to look at Brownsville, redline it, and pass it on for another day. Or say, I'm just going to invest in wireless. We're not going to go the whole way with broadband. I mean, there's a host of other things that go into that, but at a very high level, it's really an issue of fiber infrastructure that exists, but it exists for the purposes of the company versus making it available to the community. There are some financial challenges, but we actually surveyed through our broadband feasibility and digital inclusion plan. We surveyed our community and we found that there is a willingness to make that investment by the community. It's not as acute as some would think. I think what we need to work on overall is the pricing model and try to find that sweet spot where we can make it affordable to the majority of the community and not get too creative with too many pricing packages, but try to hit that sweet spot of what's that $80 range or whatever it is, to where you get the lion's share of the customers. And then if you have to potentially have a secondary rate for some type of subsidy or affordability package, then you do that, but you keep it simple. You're going to have two rates: a standard rate, get hopefully 75% of your customers, and then the balance of that is the affordability rate. But that would be a way for us to ensure that the absorption is there. But based on survey responses and based on the pricing that the market has in the moment, because in Brownsville, there's only 2 providers. There isn't a lot of competition. We've done some site visits to the city of Dayton, the city of Mount Bellevue, which are small suburbs of Houston. They had like 8 to 10 providers. Obviously, they're outside of Houston, but nonetheless, they have 10,000 and 8,000 people respectively. We have 200,000, and we have 2. So talk about competition, right? It's non-existent. So that's kind of what we're facing here.
Yeah,
I've heard that Johnny has come into the picture. Do you see that, Andres? Johnny seems to be on board.
Yeah, he's coming on. He's coming on. Johnny, are you there?
I'm here.
Hello.
Excellent to see you, but we can hear you.
You can't see me, but you can hear me. That's good. When I'm driving, you shouldn't be able to see me, right?
Say hello to Noel.
Hello, Noel. How you doing?
Hey, John, good to hear from you. Good to see you. I can't see you. I can see that fancy photo.
Well, I had to come on. I just finished a meeting, and everything is good. How you doing? You doing all right?
I am. They're asking me all the hard questions, so I need some backup from you now.
Well, you got them. I mean, you got them.
Okay. So let me circle back here, Noel. So we got your perspective on broadband. I think you're right on the money. The 3 other things that we track very simply here is what's going on in smart buildings. And there is this clearly with COVID and going back into buildings and workspace and space. It's really fascinating what's happening. Clearly, building codes may need to change because of COVID. Retrofitting, all kinds of climate things, air pollution control, maybe new things need to be added to buildings to make them safer. there's an organization that I find very interesting called the Well Health Safety Rating Organization that is basically have sanctioned something like 1.5 billion square feet of space, and depending on what number you do, it's a significant number of buildings, and it's not a cheap thing to get that seal on your building. It's anywhere from $3,000 to $20,000 depending on your square footage. But clearly, there's a need for is the building safe from COVID point of view, right? So that's one thing we're tracking. Curious to think what you think about that. The other one is energy, and obviously you own the Brownsville Public Utility District is bolted to the hip to the city, and there's all kinds of changes there about smart grid and smart metering and so on. And then last but not least, you mentioned about what's going on with the need of our cities and what does that mean. So walk us through your thoughts and your vision of you've been doing public service for a while. You have a phenomenal perspective of what's going on in Texas in different cities. You're a great study. You're super smart. You track what's going on at the nationwide level. How do you envision Brownsville going from 200,000 people to 1 million people, sort of like Austin did in the last 20 years? And how does smart buildings, smart utilities, smart plays into that?
What was that third one you mentioned? New something?
Smart cities, smart utilities, smart buildings. How do they play into you growing from 200,000 to 1 million people? How do you see that coming together?
Sure. So let me start with the energy one. So the energy
Yep.
one, and that's our Brownsville Public Utilities Board. There's ironically, we have our own electric utility for the same reason. It's very much analogous to why we're now taking this self-reliant approach of investing in ourselves on the broadband side. We were on the short end a century ago almost. So the fact that we have our own electric utility is actually a major advantage because it facilitates the investment in broadband. It is a key for the smart city program that we are working on, and we're working with CMG on that. So that roadmap, we're branding it as digital BTX to not make it so technical from a community perspective, but the key, a lot of it lies in the synergy that we can have with our public utilities board. I think ultimately what we're working to do is closing the loop there and working a lot more together with the utilities. We're starting with the broadband project. It involves AMI or smart meters, and it involves street lights. It involves ensuring that street lights are not looked at in a single use purpose, but in a multi-use purpose, so that we don't just resort to savings with LED light retrofits, but instead, what additional applications could we layer to really make that work similar to the iPhone, right? Where you have an iPhone with apps. What other apps can we really build into it? I think for us, from a smart city standpoint, what's very interesting is smart city for us has several different connotations. I would say that first of all, it kind of starts with the people. I think the smart city for us starts with developing our employees to where they are able to make that recognition of the need to innovate, the need to think through how we have been allocating resources, our capital allocations, and things like that. I think over time, there have been some things that we've invested in that haven't paid off, that haven't bared any the fruit that was initially conceived. And we have other concerns like land use, how we've been growing, our development pattern, whether or not that's sustainable. And all of these things, when I look at smart cities and how will Brownsville go from 200,000 to $1 million, I would challenge ourselves in terms of how does Brownsville grow more equitably and sustainably from 250,000 to 100,000, because the current model we have is not sustainable. And we've run the numbers on our land use pattern. We've looked at our kind of infrastructure needs at a very high level. If you look at our societal impacts because of those needs, going back to the issue of the digital divide and stuff like that, it's not the formula for a thriving community. Now, when you look at technology, I'm not saying that technology for us will become the silver bullet answer. What I would say though is that it can be kind of the gel or the enabler, because It can basically enhance the decision-making process, the data-driven approach that we can then use for making those smarter decisions. So the smart
Right.
city connotation for Brownsville, in my mind, takes on a very different approach. It has to transcend technology, and it has to use technology as a means to an end, so that we are then permeating other aspects of Brownsville's structural challenges, that technology can help be a tool that we can address those needs. And as we grow over time, because we have the capacity, I think our comprehensive plan has us at somewhere like around 500,000 or more, but that's also based on density and a whole bunch of other factors. But if we truly understand the competitive advantage, the market leadership, so to speak, that we could develop and attain through the use of technology strategically, I think that is what would make us, help us be a thriving community into the future. I couldn't think of a better example than NewSpace. NewSpace right now, just today, there was a release of a pre-seed funding going out for a company called Space Ventures. It is an investment platform for like mutual funds that the retail investor can use in new space startup companies. They're going to be developing that platform, finalizing it in Brownsville. We have invested some of our economic development monies, but that is a 21st century economic development business model centered on technology. These folks from New York and some of the data scientists that they have working here perhaps wouldn't move to Brownsville before. Brownsville couldn't benefit. There's a concept out there that Steve Case, the founder of AOL, he has this concept out there called the rise of the rest. See, he's saying, how do you get the wealth from Boston and Silicon Valley into the core of the country, into the heartland, and into these other, the Austins of the world, the Pittsburghs of the world, the places that are doing the things that are building the ecosystems. If we build the right ecosystem and technology plays a key role as part of that competitive advantage, to me, I think it will permeate new spaces the way it's permeating economic development, right? But you can apply that to health. We have high rates of diabetes. You can apply that to entrepreneurship and startup companies so that we can be incubating talent within Brownsville. That helps with the economically distressed. We can talk about the digital divide and how monetizing broadband, data, information that is our communities now is in our hands. All those things are now working in concert because we were able to leverage technology. So now as we grow in that area, Brownsville then can be a lot more viable.
No, let me ask you about the livable city. Whenever I write about smart cities, I get a slew of letters and phone calls about how livable will they be, how walkable. Walkability is something that's hugely important to people, apparently, but not something that shows up when we start discussing smart cities with the technology and interconnectivity and sped up traffic and all of these virtuous things that are going to come about and which I heartily applaud. But parks, walkability, things for people to look at in the street, how do you see that evolving? Those cities that have basically revived their old central cores to make them interesting places have done very well by it. And just north of you in San Antonio, that's true. How do you see the livability of Brownsville, say, in 20 years?
Sure. So, interestingly, Brownsville is also investing heavily in a regional trail network, and it's being incorporated and weaved into our development pattern, into our built environment. The idea initially was to kind of help curtail the rate of diabetes, and it's working. There's a definition out there for smart city that it's about livability, walkability, and sustainability. And for us, when you talk about smart city, technology is great, but if you look at smart city development, let's say there's like the Asian model, there's like the European model, and then there's like the Western model, right? If you look at the Asian model, I would suggest that model is more, in ways, more relatable to Brownsville because it's multicultural, multi-generational in approach. And our planning horizons is, even though we do comp planning in 20-year horizons and that kind of thing, we've been talking about taking that kind of the 100 to 500 year planning approach and taking the cradle to grave approach, that we need to care for the baby as much as the elderly. How we want to be building that wholesome community. So for us, when you talk about livability, we need to look at our investments truly being equitable, truly being something that can survive the test of time, so to speak. And what we're doing in that vein is we're establishing our land use patterns in a more thoughtful way. We're looking at our quality of life investments in a similar light, so that they can work in a complementary way. Today, I would tell you that our numbers might show that, we have some acute challenges, and we do. But we've taken that whole Jim Collins approach of you acknowledge the brutal facts, and then you kind of move from there. And I think that's the empowering part of where we are, in that the decisions we're making, they're pretty bold, they're innovative, and they're really intended to chip away over time into making us a wholesome community, which certainly encompasses the livable, the sustainable side of things.
The one big
right.
issue for cities and for livability and for the future that we have not touched on is how good are tools and how can you make them better?
Yes, this is John. You had mentioned when we talk about smart city, we don't talk about the human research side of training. And you said we make sure that our city employees are trained up to the smart city. And then you mentioned data science. So given the changes in technology in the city, do you have a training program to train the employees on the smart city concept? Because through our discussions, we've never talked about the actual training of people who will manage, or will they all be data scientists? So what's your comments on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. We took part in November of last year. So one of the programs that I have found that speaks to that from an organizational context and then the community context is SMU has a program on building the intelligent enterprise. And it shows you the maturity model of how you evolve the organization into that data science. Many don't understand that it's a journey, right? From your prescriptive analytics to your predictive to your, so you have to be descriptive, predictive, prescriptive. There's a model, there's a hierarchy within the data science world. For us, it's something that we've identified as being, we're starting with leadership development, but we understand that the inclusion part and the bringing people along is training them in those skills, upskilling them, reskilling them, and repurposing them, but all working kind of in alignment with a broader vision. We can't kind of make decisions in a piecemeal way. In other words, if we're thinking of broadband, that's why the plan was thoughtfully worded: broadband feasibility and digital inclusion. That's where the people side, kind of the whole change management, the whole bringing that skill set and bringing them, the community and the organization both along in that journey. There's an entire science to how that gets done. I think for us, it starts with the recognition that you can't separate the two. You can't neglect the need for creating those data scientists. It's interesting because Space Ventures, this firm that we're talking about, that's who they were hiring. And they were looking for four people. And we were kind of, going around in circles looking for 4 people that could man their operations here in Brownsville. So, I mean, it's the tip of the iceberg. It makes it real in that what we're going to have to support as a city on the skills side. We've even thought about our event center that we want to repurpose, and it doesn't serve a mission for us as much as it used to, perhaps. But we've been talking about shuttering that and maybe converting that to a training center that we can use for our employees in the community.
Let me follow up real quick before we run out of time. We are 10, 12 minutes away, and we can run over, Noel, on your clock. Let's talk about space. So space is the final frontier. We have now the Space Force. We have SpaceX. We got Virgin Galactic, whatever it's called. We got Blue Origin. We got all the billionaires focusing on what's going on in space. And we want to conquer Mars and we want to send stuff all the way to whatever, Uranus and so on and so on. And we want to live in the moon, and maybe the next 10 years from now, 5 years from now, getting married in the moon will be the thing of the day. But you got Elon Musk already sitting in greater Brownsville, and I saw tweeting. I follow him and I follow a lot of people on Twitter, and he was tweeting over I don't know if you saw the tweets. And he was inviting openly everybody, please move to Brownsville, South Padre / Boca Chica area. SpaceX, we're hiring people, move down there. You probably know that he's already created a huge impact from the momentum in Austin with the Gigafactory, where he's tweeting again that he's going to hire 10,000 people. And I'm not economic development expert, you are, but according to some of the people that I have seen, they're saying that his impact, one, because of what he does, manufacturing, building rockets, building cars, and two, because of the magnetism that he has, his impact of job creation around his ventures are, instead of just being 1 and 5 to 1, are the order of 10 to 1 or more. So what's your take on the Elon Musk impact, which is a very unique, once in a lifetime opportunity, and what's going on with space, and your thoughts of participating in that and turning Brownsville into the Paris, into the San Diego of South Texas?
Yeah, that's a figure I wasn't aware of. So I took notes there in terms of his job creation impact. That's a pretty significant number, because I don't have to then try to quantify that, because I was going to tell you it's unknown, right? But it seems that there's a metric out there in terms of what it could be. But what I would say first is that we are well aware of what opportunities lie before us. So New Space, when we set out in 2019, and we started with funding a nonprofit that's really based more on educational programming and some research and networking and business, not really business development, but really they were those that were facilitating the introduction into this still very small new space world. And that was called Expanding Frontiers. And they are up and running, and they have their role to fill. Through our economic development efforts, we have done a lot of due diligence, and we know what the potentials are. We are basically understanding that there's a whole set of sub-markets under what deep space will then rely on to continue its efforts. So there's a quote out there that you don't go into new space to become a billionaire, you become a billionaire to go into space. And if you look at Bezos, if you look at Musk and the guy from Virgin, was it Branson? So if you look at them, it's really a billionaire's playhouse. But yet they're creating, to your point, the Elon Musk effect. They're creating, because when NASA privatized space, many don't understand that there's a host of NASA transfer technologies that have not hit the market. So when the internet hit the market, that's the analogy. When the internet hit the market, it opened up a whole new world after that. The whole app economy and democratization of a whole bunch of industries could not have existed without the internet. Well, same thing with new space. But deep space is kind of setting the tone, and there are about 8 sub-markets that then operate within that. There's life support, there's biomedicine, there's fuel, there's tourism, space tourism. There are about 8 markets, and there's knowledge out there about what those potentials are. So our focus is to leverage what you're just saying. Whether not so much the job creation, I think that'll happen through Musk's own efforts. What we're looking is to capitalize on the $1 trillion plus industry that Morgan Stanley speaks to, that by 2040, new space will become its own marketplace. We want to position Brownsville to become an ecosystem for more companies that are within those submarkets to land here. We don't want to necessarily disrupt or compete against SpaceX. We want to leverage their presence here. One of the things that we've done recently is our airport was expanded. It was a $70 million project. And in February 2019, we applied for a feasibility study to become a spaceport. And a spaceport is a horizontal launch pad that complements the work of deep space. It's those companies that don't have to go to Mars. It's those companies that need to get to the edge of space to provide their fueling systems, to provide the average person the ability to go into space on a trip. And we want to create that here. And there's only 10 applications that have been submitted, and we're one of the first 10 that has already been approved by FAA. And now through our EDC,
Wow.
we've put in the first 450,000 to get that done. So our airport is now going to become an aerospace campus that includes a space component. We still have acreage there that hasn't been developed, and versus it being the traditional manufacturing only, it's already becoming a space that we're marketing, or acreage that we're marketing for these new space companies. And you're going to hear very soon, we're very not just optimistic, but this year, additional companies that will be locating around our airport, leveraging that spaceport. And there's a reason why we pulled the trigger to go from feasibility to actual operations. So we are acutely aware of the opportunities. It's a new infusion of wealth that Brownsville can benefit from. And I think Brownsville is not going to miss the boat this time.
I want to ask a
John, you had a
question.
question?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right in terms of I always looked at NASA as an R&D. Everything from Tang to the internet comes out of NASA. I never looked at it as a place for people to go build a house. But if you look at all of the great technologies that came out of NASA, that has been NASA's contribution as a major research unit, where business enterprise then take that technology, whether it's the internet, whether it is a calculator, whether it is a cell phone, that all came out of NASA research. So I think that's a great way of looking at it.
Absolutely. We actually worked with, right before he retired, and now he's doing consulting work, and he's actually working for a venture capital group. But Space Ventures is a pre-seed company. So now we have SpaceX. Now we have Elon Musk. We have one of the 3 deep space companies. They're in their own world, right? These other companies aren't competing with them. They're building around them. You have now a spaceport. You now have a company that's bringing in pre-seed money, and the Security and Exchange Commission changed the pre-seed limit for space companies from $1 million to $5 million late last year. Space Ventures locating in Brownsville. So you're seeing the pieces of the puzzle come together. And there's some additional opportunities. We have a strategic plan and a business model behind the scenes, but it's coming together. And that's the exciting part. Steven Gonzalez, which is with NASA, he was their director of technology transfer programs. There were 2 programs that we went out, and in one of those, we actually competed and received an award for that. There's 2 programs. One's called Rockets and Rigs, which seeks to align the capital from the energy markets, from the oil markets with space. And we took part in one of those events last year. And then there's SpaceCom. And that's one of the kind of the trade show for space, for new space. And we were able to actually have our strategic plan vetted through him before he retired, so that we would be on the right path in terms of what does Brownsville need to do so that some of these technologies can bud in our community.
Right. Llewelyn?
Yes, I got a bit drowned out, unfortunately. My question is, it's very nice to have all this top-down development, big companies coming in, super tech, etc. But there's another magnetism that works for cities, for communities, and that is good schools. If you have good schools, you will be a magnet for all kinds of and even middling companies. Without schools, you lose that big magnetic effect, and you have a social problem, a huge divide between the haves and the have-nots when the high-tech companies get going and get established and bring in a workforce somewhere else. Yeah. So I ask you, Noel, how are your public schools and what are you doing to make them even better?
They can use some improvement. I mean, there's a reason why Elon Musk put $20 million into Brownsville schools and then 10 to downtown redevelopment. Downtown is a heartbeat of a city. A healthy downtown makes for a healthy community. And we recognize that. And even from a land use perspective, we recognize that there's a high payoff and a high ROI because there's no additional infrastructure and services that we need to service downtown other than creating the right regulatory environment for the private sector to flourish. But the schools can use improvement. At this time, I couldn't tell you that we are at the point where it needs to be, but I'm optimistic that they've gone through some change in leadership. And I think it boils down to the same thing that was plaguing the city. They need the right leadership. They need the right vision. They need to understand how to work how to govern properly, how to, focus on tackling their issues to become more attractive, because what's threatening them, our schools have actually seen a decline which is a good thing because it creates options, but charter schools have been kicking their tail down here. It's kind of been one of those, it's an innovation, right? Charter schools, it's
Right.
another competitor. And when you don't, when you don't provide that quality education the community desires, they'll go to a charter school. And so I think that overall they understand that they have their homework cut out. I think us as a city partner, we want to do our part to work in collaboration because we understand, to your point, that good schools are part of the formula. And that applies to the traditional economic development as much as it does to new space.
Absolutely. Parting thoughts, Noel, it's fantastic to have you. We could go on. I think you are one of the smartest city managers in America. You have been through and tried. You've moved around, learned a lot from a lot of people. You're very, you read voraciously everything you can. I'd love to your answers to our questions and the plans. And many of us are behind you, helping you, hoping to make you the next Austin or the next Paris, San Diego, whichever you want to pick. Tell us, will you come back and visit us? And could we have you at the 360 Summit at the end of August, early September to give us maybe a keynote?
Sure, I would love to, Andres. I would love to.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for coming on, because I think we really need the interaction between the smart city and what you're talking about, preparing individuals to do well. You have the public school system, and remember that family background also accounts for a lot of variability in kids doing well. So I think that Brownsville is set for great future with you, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Llewelyn?
Well, thank you very much, Noel. Very interesting. And if I were to leave you with a bit of advice, unsolicited, I would look at something which might identify your city, brand it. Cities that put in some public thing to brand them tend to attract tourists, whether it's San Antonio with Riverwalk or Paris with the Eiffel Tower, or the cable cars in San Francisco, something that identifies cities, branding them. I used to be a travel writer, and I learned very early that people go to cities that have a brand, and usually it's some particular thing that is built. It can be a ride, or it can just be a structure, like the arches in St. Louis. But that makes a huge difference in putting a city on the tourist map.
Well, I hope that the starship that Elon Musk has created, just when it's erected, it creates quite the landmark and branding in and of itself, right?
I agree.
But yes, absolutely.
Good show.
And one of the things that we use, our tagline kind of has been a play on words. It's on the border by the sea and beyond. So we have to build the brand around that beyond piece. Because the beyond piece, I think, is what we're focusing on. And we understand that the hard work is ahead of us. And I think my parting words are that we understand. And when we committed to culture and all the things that we discussed today, we understood that it takes time. But at the same time, we understand that we made some quantum leaps, right? We live in an era where you don't have to take keep focused on the long term, but that doesn't mean that you can't make decisions in the short term that could help accelerate things. And I think that's what we're focusing on we're playing the long game. We're playing the long game, but at the same time, we want to make noise now. And there's nothing that says we can't get some early wins under our belt, and some of that's already in progress, which I think is why you're seeing some of the Brownsville buzz.
Yeah, I totally agree. My friend. Thank you for being with us again. All well. We'll see you soon. Thank you. Congratulations on everything you're doing. Stay the course.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, guys.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Nice to meet you.